Okay, let me, before Judy takes over and ask Senator, I'm just wondering, because those who also will remind us that it appears it's a common practice that some of these agencies retain a certain percentage of services they provide. They say, look, the NCC does that, the NERC, all of those agencies also retain a certain percentage of services they provide. So doesn't even with the existence of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, isn't that the case?
Now, after the coming into force of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, if you remember, on the floor of the Senate, I sponsored several bills on the NNPC and the Central Bank of Nigeria, seeking that the provisions in their respective acts, which allows them to budget for themselves, approve for themselves, and keep something and keep any money outside the provisions of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, should be amended. And even the Fiscal Responsibility Act has stated that any provision of any law which is inconsistent with the provisions of this act shall, to the extent of that inconsistency, be void. Therefore, I will urge the National Assembly, and I will urge legislative advocates and the legal community to answer this question. Can it, after the coming into effect of the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007, can any other agency or any other provision in any law be made to be contrary to the provisions of the Fiscal Responsibility Act without specifically accepting the provisions of the Fiscal Responsibility Act? Therefore, the provisions in this bill, when it is being reconsidered, it should be considered that no agency of the federal government should behave as if it were a supervisor or the owner of the federal government itself. No agency. If you remember the fight I fought on the floor of the Senate over this matter, I think this is one of the areas that is, as a sitting senator, from 2011 to 2015, I had a lot of fight on this matter. And that was when I insisted, under the leadership of David Mark, that all the agencies and the budget that the president submits, we should pass the budget of each of the agencies and make all of them comply with the Fiscal Responsibility Act. What am I saying? All I'm saying is that the provisions here should be made to be only subject to the provisions of the Fiscal Responsibility Act and not higher or to override the provisions of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Because the Fiscal Responsibility Act says that whatever, if you read Section 22, and all of it, I think which I'm correct, and all of it, 19 to 22, say that whatever you have, you generate, other than that which is your own, what you retain, you should have 20% and pay 80%, but not in the manner it is stated here in this bill. I pray that we should just, in fact, the simplest of what could happen here is to say that the funding of each of these institutions should be in accordance with the provisions of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Okay.
Let me also ask you, the bill provides that the PRC is answerable to the National Assembly. Is the presidency comfortable with that?
I want to say that for now, what is before the president is the Petroleum Industry Governance Bill. And the only sections that Mr. President, the only of the sections thus far that Mr. President has reservations about are the ones he has written to the National Assembly. And I have, in deference to the powers of the National Assembly and the fact that I should not overstretch the privilege of the privilege of speaking on only a few of this. All others, which are the contents of the letters addressed to the Senate and the House of Representatives, all others are there. But I did not want to overstretch the privilege of just bringing out a few.
Senator Inang, when you look at the process, some people will say, look, if the process is good, results will be good. If it's bad, results will be bad. Well, when you look at the process of how this legislation came about, and you know that the international oil companies lobbied so hard, they spent so much resource on getting members of National Assembly on board with what it is to kind of factor in their interests in the establishment of this bill. When you look at that and you see provisions like the one, and I'm surprised that there's no query on this. I want to ask you why the president did not query this. That one of the clauses is that from 5 years, within the first 5 years of incorporation of the new parent company, the National Petroleum Company, that 10% of the NPC stake must be divested to essentially to private ownership. And then within 10 years, that's 5 years later, another 30% of the NPC must be divested to the private sector, which means that the federal government, by signing this bill, will only control 60% stake of the parent oil company of the country in 10 years. When you look at, if you're an IOC now and you're doing a joint venture, you own 100% of your company, and then potentially you could be owning 40% stake in the government's company. Is this not clearly unpatriotic, and why did the president not query that?
I have said that I will not state all the queries that Mr. President raised, because it is contained in the letter of communication to the president. But I also want members of the Nigerian public to please know that whenever a bill is before the National Assembly, all members of the public have a right to concern or to raise questions on it. And I know that Channels Television and the guests were a very great active participants in the discussions. Were these issues raised? And of course, even if they were not raised, I will not say all the issues that Mr. President has stated to the legislature until the letter is read on the floor, or at the discretion of the Senate President and the Speaker of the House, they make the public know all the issues that have been raised, so that the public perhaps could be part of building consensus or building opinion on what they should consider when perhaps there is a conference, a back-channel conference.
You know, one of the other issues is obviously the issue of how it's going to work in terms of which powers would be removed from the Minister of Petroleum Resources, which of course right now is President Muhammadu Buhari. One of them is the regulatory function of the minister. It is said now that those powers of the minister will be now given to a 9-member board of board members that would now determine some of the regulatory policies of the NPRC. What are your thoughts about that? Was that one of the queries raised within the generality of queries you mentioned?
Well, as a lawyer, I think I will stay within. I will still stay within the issues because I will not overstretch by going to other matters which may be the issues that Mr. President may have raised before the legislature. I want the public to take a look at the bill, as it were, and the bill as passed, so that they could raise other issues which in the course of discussion or contention may have should be an issue. Because whenever Mr. President or the issues are addressed and Mr. President assents to it, it becomes a law. It binds everybody. And the investors who will be investing in this sector in Nigeria will be investing with this in mind. And if they invest with this in mind, and you cannot change law or the contract after it has been executed. Therefore, let us start in advance to look at some of the provisions which we may consider obnoxious, and then raise it to the legislature, perhaps by way of public concerns, so that as the legislature resumes on their break, even if it is not one of the issues that Mr. President may have had reservations about, the public could say, yeah, this is a national asset. Public could say, look, if this were not done this way, we wouldn't be going to borrow from the Eurobond, from the international money market, and we would be asking them to do things for us. Our money would be there and made available to us to fund our budget, run our infrastructure, because this is one of the most important bills. No wonder it has gone through such processes, but it goes through this process so that it will come out as the best of refined legislations.